I had the privilege recently of traveling to Asia. My husband's father was born in Thailand, so he is 100% Indian by blood, but now I've learned considered half Thai Indian. And packing is something that causes me tremendous stress, so I decided to start packing earlier this time around because we were about to board a plane for 18 hours and spend 10 days on the other side of the planet, literally. And as I was packing, my husband reminded me that this heat was going to be like no heat I had ever experienced in my life. And at this age, sometimes I'm experiencing heat that I've never experienced in my life to begin with, so I wanted to bring some of my most loose-fitting clothing and some of the summer dresses that you'll see me romping around New York in when our temperatures rise. But this time, as I packed my bag and I grabbed my usual poolside frocks and strapless or perhaps just thin strapped outfits, my husband approached me and said, "Remember something. We're going to a different country. We're going to be seeing people of a different culture. A lot of my family is Sikh, and so you're going to want to pack things that are a little more conservative." And my initial reaction was, oh, yes, of course, I wouldn't want to offend your family. I wouldn't want to upset anyone. I even found myself asking him, what should our 9-year-old daughter wear and what should our almost 12-year-old daughter wear? I also realized I didn't have many summer dresses with short sleeves or any sleeves for that matter. So I ended up running to a friend's house who has a lovely collection of clothing and borrowing things that were more conservative. But in the process, what I realized was that my husband was not concerned about packing differently. I, as a female, was the only one that needed to alter myself. Now, I'm all for when in Rome mentality, but it began a thought process and got me to wondering and thinking, why is it still in this day and age, in 2024, that women need to adjust themselves so significantly and severely, if you will, depending on the lens of what culture and country it is we are visiting?
Hey everyone, you're listening to Gyno Curious and Vulva Views with Amy and Allison. Welcome. So if you like our show today, please send comments at radiofreerhiniecliff.org. Go to Facebook where Gyno Curious has a webpage and Radio Free Rhiniecliff. And you can phone us at 845-307-RHIN. And please follow us, like us, give us 5 stars with comments so we can continue to communicate with you and your communities. Allison, I can so relate to this packing phenomenon.
You know, and I don't want to sound like I wasn't willing to acclimate because I always am. And even though I'm a woman that really appreciates clothing, I'm pretty conservative as it is. I'll throw a halter strap on or some spaghetti straps now and then. But I'm not someone who's walking around in belly shirts or overly tight leggings and slacks, for example. And I really thought, oh my gosh, I think of myself as fairly conservative or covered up, if you will, as it is. But now I really need to find a way to hide myself even more.
I want to take us back just a step, too, because I was just thinking about the act and art of unpacking.
I hate it.
And, you know, I don't mind it, but I am not, let's just say I'm known as being an overpacker. And my daughter is too. And I also know that I have historically done the packing in our family and wondered whether I was, unusual in that way. And so I was just reading. I was reading about packing. Mm-hmm. And there are some small, albeit not terribly scientific studies out there that demonstrate that 75% of women in heterosexual couples do the packing in their family.
I've seen something like that.
Yeah.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. And I also, I was also thinking about, I don't know, at the same time, I was watching some period piece on Netflix, and you see them taking these huge trunks off of the carriages when the women are visiting for the weekend and thinking, and I thought I was an overpacker, and realized that women in those days had such fancy frocks and petticoats and layers and layers and layers. That was part of the reason they had these trunks.
Right.
And moreover, I realized that men, typically their outfits, which have been pretty fancy over the centuries.
Yes, indeed.
Often a reflection of status and wealth.
Mhm.
When one thinks of like the monarchies in England,
Mhm.
very fancy dress. But anyway, they often had pockets. Women never had pockets in their clothing.
Mm.
So we had to have bags and bags
And more bags.
So I was just thinking about all the stuff that we've accumulated in our dress over the years. And then I was thinking about this issue of culture and social milieu and how that impacts what we wear.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and also when you're mentioning the petticoats and layers, and you think back to the Victorian era, most of that necessary clothing and layers and high-necked shirts or dresses and skirts that came to the floor and covered the toes of the shoes and even hid sleeves that hid the wrists, there was an intention there. Society forced women to cover themselves because the Victorian era put so much shame around sexuality.
Absolutely. And, in cultures that practice modesty, this is the term that's often used by, every community from observant Jews to Muslim to Amish, etc.
Buddhists, even the Buddhists,
Yeah.
the woman, the body of the female in particular can, is viewed as something that can affect the meditation process or have a negative influence on the monks. And most monks are men. There are some that are females, but in most traditions, the monks are men. And so the women, if they enter the monastery, have to be covered.
Yeah, so it's not isolated to a small section of the world. It's a pretty substantial cohort of people who practice this modesty culture. And it certainly seems to stem from the desire to avoid the sexualization of women because men can't control themselves. And it's not as if some of these modest cultures don't have some rules, if you will, around how men dress. Men in some of these cultures can't expose from the belly button to their knees and have to cover the pelvis as well. But it's not full body coverage.
No, that too, because I said to my husband, I asked him, so are you going to wear longer shorts when we're out there? Do you have to cover your knees? I know that sounds ridiculous, but for me, just my shoulders.
It's really striking. And it's a little bit, I don't know, titillating. Ooh, what's considered erogenous zones? Like the shoulder, the neck, the wrist, the hand.
Right.
And
they are. They
Of
all
course,
are.
of
I
course.
get it.
Yeah.
But like you said, let's practice a little self-control. If it's 103 degrees and 100% humidity and women are dying to just take their shawls off so they can breathe for a while.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. And where I go a lot of places as we talk about this, but one of which reminds me that as my daughter was growing up, and she would wear clothing that I thought was too revealing. And I'd get all ill at ease, and I thought I was pretty hip. I thought I was pretty comfortable. I don't consider myself prudish. But she would wear what was popular amongst her cohort.
Oh, yes.
And I would think, that's too much skin or too much cleavage or
Yes.
too much belly. And I would unfortunately go to a place of, I think you're inviting too much of attention. It may be violent attention. I'm scared for you. I worry about you. And I would get overly dramatic, and I will take responsibility for that way of thinking. But my daughter and I, since she's more grown up now, have had conversations about it. And it was interesting because she said for a long time she was so frustrated by my comments. She felt criticized, and I got it. I get it. I can see where she felt criticized.
Sure. And it's starting to happen in my house. My almost 12-year-old is looking like a young woman, and she's
Yeah.
a very beautiful child.
Mhm.
And she will try to walk out, not in this weather necessarily, we're in the middle of winter, but she might try, in these little crop tops. And I will say, no, you can't wear that. It's too provocative. That's the word I use. And she'll say, my friends wear them. And I'll say, not your friend's mother.
Right.
Sounding
Oh, I
like
know.
my mom already. But then I do have this moment of reflection of, am I causing an issue for her? Because I have a reaction to, and again, I respect other cultures and I'm happy to adjust myself. But it's this contrast of the women still having to do it and the men not so much.
And again, if your daughter and my daughter feel empowered by their body, by the way they're dressing, and they're not worried. Now, some might say they're too young to understand the potential worry, but at the same time, if they feel beautiful, why are we in any way shaming them? We're furthering it, right?
Yeah,
And
I don't know.
yeah, well, it's
It's so hard.
It's so hard.
It's so hard because, again, I mentioned my mom, and when I was younger, my mother, my mother was actually a pretty soft-spoken, gentle person, but if she wanted to get a point across, especially when it came to my appearance, she would say, "Get back upstairs, you look like a putana," which in Italian is basically calling me a whore.
Oh, you bet. You bet.
When I was my daughter's age at the time, and I would never in a million years call my kid anything like that, but I do say things like, look, your men and women are going to start looking at you, and some of them might start looking at you inappropriately. And then, of course, my kid, what do you mean by inappropriately? I say, sexually. What do you mean by sexually? So there's this conversation around it, but then she still comes around with something like, I don't want to do anything. And I feel like I look good. And when I put that sweater on that you want me to wear, I feel embarrassed because my friends aren't dressing that way. And then I want to stick my head in the sand because I just can't figure it out.
It's tricky. It's really tricky. And it harps back to the Madonna whore dichotomy.
Right.
We're either pure or we're whores. That, again, there's so much history to how we present ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I think more than men. I just think so.
Oh,
absolutely.
100%.
And clothing has always been an important part of how we present ourselves. Men and women.
Oh, sure. And
all the spectrum.
You and I can both say that we enjoy participating.
Absolutely.
In creative expression through clothing, fashion, outfits, whatever it may be.
Yeah, yeah. So I get wanting to dress up, if you will, or take notice of my clothing and be seen, right? And the challenge is how to, again, respect the cultural norms without feeling like you're trying to put me in a box. And moreover, you're a woman who was born and raised in America, and you have certain cultural norms. I'm going to be a little provocative here.
Please do.
Like, why should you have to dress like they do in Thailand? Now, again, I'm purposely being a little ridiculous.
Please do. Yes.
And I've traveled in these places too, and I absolutely followed the cultural norms.
Of course.
And out of respect. But it isn't, again, it's this fine edge where are we promoting and perpetuating the need for women across the globe to hide their bodies by joining in? Are we showing respect? This is a subject matter that's been discussed in many venues. Here we are doing it at Vulva Views because it's happened to you on a personal level. And I would love to hear from our listeners if they've got some answers, if they've got some responses.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Or experiences. Because, there are a couple of things that you just said that I wanted to touch on. And one of them was some things do draw too much attention, and that's why we feel the need to protect our children. And I do like to wear things and enjoy being seen, but there are definitely times where I wear something and I return home for the evening and I think, I do not like the way people were looking at me in this outfit. I didn't feel safe. I used to joke and say that man was looking at me like I was a pork chop because I was just sizzling and didn't realize it. And I do think there might be a lack of that awareness in younger generations, perhaps. But the other thing I wanted to mention was while I had no problem dressing appropriately, if you will, or adapting accordingly, I had more self-consciousness than I usually would because I felt as though I was failing. Every day I would say to my husband, I would ask him, is this okay?
Yeah.
Is this enough coverage?
Yeah.
It's so hot. This only comes to just about above my knee. It made me even more self-conscious when I would enter their world.
Yeah.
And I'm in fear of coming off sounding like a privileged white woman right now. Like, oh, I felt self-conscious. Get over yourself, Allison. This is like a privilege problem. But it just got me thinking, not just about our nation, but about all of the other cultures and how women feel and how it's happening everywhere. And looking at these young girls coming down the pipeline of maturity and puberty and what they're going to have to do and change for themselves. And I wondered if people really consider this.
Yeah. Certainly we're aware of countries that had been that the norm was to cover the female body, and then there were revolutions and there was more contemporary if you will, Western wear. And now it's going back to the very, very conservative cover the body. And unfortunately, what often happens with those transitions is also repression and persecution of women for a variety of things, everything around education, speaking out, etc. So there's this, I can't always disentangle how one is supposed to look from a clothing perspective and the cultural milieu of how we're supposed to act.
Right. And what's coming up for me is that idea of wearing.
Oh my gosh. Oh my God. I'm here to say it's never okay. I don't care how she's dressed. But I think Allison and I are going to talk about our children on Vulva Views because they help us reflect on our lives and are interesting mirrors. And I have both a daughter and a son. So I was just thinking about how when my daughter got a little older, when she was in her I think she was like 20, and she was walking the streets of Brooklyn, and she called me and said, I get what you were talking about.
Oh, interesting.
And I said, what do you mean? She said, all those years where you said too much cleavage, too much belly, whatever it was that I felt concerned about. She said, I can't walk down the streets here without being catcalled. And I'm going to start wearing different clothing. And I said, I'm sorry that you're going through that. And I'm sorry that this has become a reality in your life, because it becomes a reality for almost every woman I know.
Yes.
And I've never had that conversation with my son. Never. The conversations with my son are, is he dressed professionally enough? Is he, do his clothes look ratty? It's never about the sexualization or the exposure of skin or any of that. And that's not the fault of my son. It's the nature of the conversation. It's fascinating.
Are there conversations with him? Don't catcall women?
Oh, my son is a feminist. He's a wonderful man and very, was trained and taught very early on about feminist thought and how he treats women. And so he is very aware. But he has shared with me experiences, particularly during college, where he felt so ill at ease when he heard his friends speak ill or sexualizing or teetering on slightly, I don't know, I don't want to call it violent, but subjecting women they were seeing to more kind of grotesque conversation. And it was very hard for him.
It's very upsetting. And I have been shocked to learn how young boys are saying things that I consider sexual assault in language. Here I go with my kids. One of my daughters came home and said that there was a boy in her grade, and this is the 6th grade, saying, suck my dick. Pardon saying this on air. Apologize for anyone I'm offending, but this is the reality, that we need to hear uncomfortable things because you can't stop these things unless it's addressed. And the way that it was handled was, you shouldn't say something like that. And then the parents laughed it off like, oh, it was just a joke. That's not a joke.
No.
That is something that has slipped through the cracks and continued to offend men and women alike because people want to call it a joke instead of addressing it as what it is. Completely inappropriate sexual assault.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many ways in which we use anatomy as a way of diminishing people, right? You're a pussy. I have no trouble using the word pussy in the sexual context in the bedroom.
Sure.
With your lover. Use it all you want. But when you call someone a pussy, you are not being kind.
No.
You are suggesting that women are weak, that women are powerless, and that their anatomy is something to be joked about. Yeah.
And that just brought me back again, I'm sorry, to say something since you mentioned the catcalling and your daughter coming to this realization that, oh, I get it. I realize what you were saying is that I do believe that if I allow my daughters to dress a certain way, they will get unwanted attention or dangerous attention. And that absolutely is why I am in this battle of how can I let them be themselves, but tell them, like, you cannot look like that when you leave the house.
Yeah. And I'll be hopeful that one day women and men can walk freely on the streets dressed as they want. And again, I'm talking about non-binary. I'm talking about trans. I'm talking
Everyone,
about all folks. can walk the streets dressed as they want and be safe, but it's not happening yet. And we become far too aware, as my daughter at 20 did, that unfortunately we can feel at risk on the streets. Like my daughter talks about how she absolutely does not walk anywhere alone at night. She just doesn't. She might be in a very busy New York City street, sure, but otherwise she says my male friends never have to ask that question.
Right.
Can I leave school at night by myself? Where I do.
Yeah.
And we still live in a culture, and this is true all over the globe, where women are sexually violated. And so maybe, I'll posit this, maybe cultures where one has to cover their shoulders and their knees, is there safety there? I would suggest.
It's a great question.
I would suggest there's violence against women in Islamic, Muslim countries, Amish country,
yes.
Amish communities, conservative, Orthodox Jewish communities where women are covered, but it's an interesting question.
And I joke, and I'm turning 47 soon, and I joke and say, like, man, doesn't anybody want a cat call at me?
Wait until you're 62,
I walk
honey.
I walk down the streets of Manhattan these days, and I'm like, oh, man, not a whistle, not a how are you doing, nothing. But I, too, feel unsafe walking alone in many environments, especially in the evening.
Yeah, and I want our listeners to know that Allison is a black belt. So this woman
and I'm still scared.
Yeah, this woman knows how to defend herself, but there's still this fear. There's a vulnerability that is just real. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about it when people say she should dress her age?
Oh, that's a big one. That's a big one. It's so funny. There was just a column in the Times about this issue. And again, I must admit, I'm a little confused about how I feel about it. And let me articulate more about that. Sometimes I will see another woman, my age or older, dressed in a manner that my initial response is, oh, that's too young. That's not appropriate.
Sure.
She doesn't, it just doesn't work. Doesn't work. And I have to ask myself, am I commenting or making that, having that internal response because I'm a snob about clothing? I don't know. There may be a part of that. 2, is it that I'm making judgments about her knobby knees and her, I don't know, her fleshy underarms, and that the sleeveless t-shirt just isn't okay? Mostly what I find is that when I respond to the absence of clothing, not a bathing suit. It's funny. I have no problem with a woman wearing a bathing suit, a bikini at all, no matter what age she is. But there's something about certain styles that I just respond to. And I'm not proud of that. I feel a little shame that I feel critical around it. I hear my mother's voice speaking to me. So I have to check in because I really don't know. I don't know where the I don't know where the criticism really lies. But I also know that I so love seeing beautiful women who are older and watching women age with integrity and pride and wrinkles and with flab and with just the natural aging process, and whatever they wear is okay. So maybe I just thought maybe my judgment lies more in about my judgment around clothing in general and fashion and less about age, but I'm not sure of that. But I have seen, we've all seen these extraordinary women, particularly in theater and in the movie world, where especially the British actors who don't do the touch-ups, who just are authentically older women, and they walk the red carpet and they are stunning, sexy. They show flesh. I just admire them.
I do too, but I would argue that a lot of them are in better shape than the average person that's fleshy that we're speaking of. So, my brain is just going, is it because of the way they look from the aging process, or they're a little fleshier or a little heavier versus these sort of I almost call them freaks of nature, but maybe gifts of nature that remain very youthful looking into their 70s. Is it easier to look at stuff is it easier to look at them for most people? And that's why there's less criticism on them? I mean, that's why they're on film and theater, because they're easy to look at.
Yeah, no, it's true that, we can't, we can eliminate the youth-focused lens that we are
without
living
a doubt.
in. It's very, very hard. I mean, I can just look at myself. I think I started the morning talking to Jen about waking up, and now when I look in the mirror, I'm like, that's interesting. There's just different lines than I used to see.
It's funny you say that. On the way here, I looked in the rearview mirror, and I don't use Botox or any corrections. I'm very The aging process has also been kind, I will confess. But I looked in the mirror and I thought, oh shit, look at that line between my eyes. Like, maybe I'm going to have to start some Botox. So even though I act as though I have all this pride, I am influenced and affected by that lens.
Yeah.
And how I know that people will perceive me. Because my lines are getting deeper.
Yeah.
My kids are like, do not do that stuff to your face, Mom. All those people look like they have no feelings.
Interesting.
Which is fascinating, isn't
Interesting
that?
perception.
That's why I didn't do it, because I thought, how in the hell are these kids going to know I'm angry if I can't give them a dirty look when they do something?
My kids say all they need to do is see my eyes.
That's what I mean.
Yeah,
And my mom
exactly.
had that look, and I have a look where they know I have said it. I don't even need to say I've said it nicely 3 times. I give them a look, and they go, shit, she's about to stop saying it nicely.
That's right.
But I still, on the way here, I was like, oh, maybe I should just try a little dab will do ya right between the eyes. Get rid of that line.
The trouble is, of course, is that we all know the dab
turns
leads to
into
more dabs. And, I have family members who are young women in their 30s who are already beginning all of these interventions.
That breaks my heart.
Yeah.
These 20-something-year-olds that are telling me that they're getting Botox because they want to maintain their youth, and that's just devastating.
Moreover, from a scientific point of view, we have no idea
what this
how
is
those
going
chemicals
to do.
are going to impact your overall health. And on a lot of levels, I'm very concerned about that. There's so many ways in which we can be youthful, not just how we look, but how we act, how we think, how we speak, how we celebrate life and dance. So I'd like to suggest that somehow or another, even though we started this conversation talking about clothing and that part of the unpacking, it feels like what we've tried to do today is unpack this conversation, because it's got to do with not only how we dress, but how we look to others, the cultural environment in which we are in, and then ultimately, of course, how we look at ourselves. And it's, there are a lot of lenses out there. There are a lot of mirrors out there. There's a lot of judgment out there. And,
so much judgment.
Yeah.
And that's why I do say things like you should wear, because I can dress rather eccentrically at times because it makes me happy. And I know that there are people that think I look like a rodeo clown or wonder what my mental health is for some of the things I pick out, but it makes me feel happy. So I do it. And so I try to support young women or any women or men, any gender, non-gender, to be themselves. But no matter how I think about it, when I go through the ideas and the possibilities of outfits, I do go back to that. No, you got to cover yourself some more.
And I can say there are certain pieces of clothing I don't buy anymore, just because of the way I'm critical of my body. And moreover, just feeling like, you know what? I don't feel comfortable anymore in that. I don't know if it's that level of exposure or just I feel more comfortable in this versus that.
Same. And I feel very attractive and feminine and sexy with my short hair and like a loose jumpsuit, for example. And it's stylish and I have my makeup on, but there's ways to be appealing without revealing, if you will.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't know how many times you've experienced this, but I've had women walk into a room. Let's just say I'm at a cocktail party and there are lots of people. And then all of a sudden, a woman in particular, but it could be others, walks into a room and the place almost goes silent. And it's not necessarily because that person is classically beautiful or classically handsome. they walk into the room with a level of confidence and spirit and just energy that is so exciting.
The presence, the confidence, and I love people like that.
I know.
I'm sure I was intimidated by them in my 20s, but these days, I mean, I love complimenting anyone that looks great, regardless of who they are.
Absolutely.
But people like that, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
I want to be like that.
Exactly.
I want to be that person.
Exactly. So it's about that inner beauty, that inner confidence, the capacity to be in the world as you are authentically. Yeah.
And I really would love to hear the opinions of others for anyone, for those listening. I'm really curious to know, and I'm not afraid to be criticized. There are things that I say where I'm like, I wish I didn't feel that way, or I wish I didn't see things that way. But it is something that not until I had this personal experience going to Asia, it just wasn't something that I was thinking about consciously. Obviously, it's been in the forefront of my psyche because of the way I make decisions with my children and myself, but it really got me thinking like, wow, this is a much stronger current than I was aware of before that interaction with my husband. And my husband's a feminist too, like your son.
Yeah.
He was raised by an OBGYN. His sister's an OBGYN. I think my kids are probably going to go to him when they get their periods. You know, it's just one of those, and it's beautiful. I'm so thankful that I have him as the father to these girls. It wasn't until he said, like, I need you to cover up a little bit more. And again, I'm not a provocative dresser, that I thought, whoa, this is so interesting. This is much more powerful than I gave it credit for in the past.
Right. It's again, it's not just about literally the items you pack. It's about unpacking the emotions attached to those clothes.
Right.
And the way we feel in the world. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I came home and my style of unpacking is essentially turning the suitcases upside down, because even if we launder things while we're traveling, I wash them again. And this time there were a few things I thought, I always joke and say I'd rather light the laundry on fire than have to fold it and wash it. But I looked at a few things and I thought, I'm never going to wear that again. Oh, but yes, I will, because I'm going to go back to Asia, to Thailand, to see my husband's family again. It just became this new level of awareness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I need a new clothing rack, honey.
And then there's that. Yeah, there's a lot to think about. And again, I'd love to hear from our listeners. How do you feel as you age and you pack your clothes? And do you overpack because you're nervous about not having what you need? Are you nervous because you just want to have choices? Or are you being told that you have to dress a certain way? That's not necessarily your style at home, but is culturally appropriate in this place that you're going? And how does that make you feel? And also, what does it mean? Do you need to go to your friend's house to go through their closet? Do you need to buy new things? And again, do we do this out of respect? Do we do this out of shame? Should we fight this system? Should we go along? These are questions that I'm not absolutely clear about.
Nor am I.
Yeah.
And again, I will say I enjoy participating in other cultures. I feel very blessed and fortunate that I can do that. But again, it just became more about the awareness of how, as a woman, I have to change my appearance everywhere I go.
That's it. It's not just about traveling abroad. It's about going to Brooklyn. When I go to New York on Thursday, I will think about, where am I going again?
That's right.
What am I wearing? And I'm not just talking about the weather. I'm talking about feeling like I'm dressed in a comfortable way from a lot of different perspectives. Yeah, it could be next door. And we're also talking about the environment of your office or the environment of the gym, or it's next door. Where
and they all have a culture.
That's right. Exactly.
Because I know that some people think, what do you mean, the gym or every environment has its own culture.
That's right. That's right. And I do think that women more often than men have to think about what's appropriate and who's determining it.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I also had thought to myself, we as humans, as women, a lot of women in the media have worn outfits of different cultures, and we are so discouraged from cultural appropriation, but expected to always be culturally appropriate.
Touche.
Right?
Touche. So please let us know how you think, what you want to hear, your response to Vulva Views. Like us, follow us, give us 5 stars with comments so we can continue to communicate with you and learn from you, and let us know what you're thinking.
Yeah, email us, call the station. We're actually 2 people that love to communicate and will respond. Might take a little bit of time, but we are here and you will hear from us.
Absolutely. I am Amy Novet, MD, gynecologist.
And I'm Allison Chawala, psychotherapist and alternative healer.
And you are listening to Vulva Views.